Hi everyone, we are now going to create Amu's other jewelry design. I'll be cutting the circle for the top. Sarah will later do the beading section. So for the circle, we're also going to hand cut it because our circle cutter is only used for bigger circles. So I'm now going to cut a 5.5 centimeter square where I'm going to do as I did previously, mark out the half points, cut away the excess so we can polish that away. I have my glass. Important, we also need our clear spectacles for any glass shards, our ruler, marker, our grouser, happy snappers, and our glass cutter, as well as our terps. Okay, so let's first mark out the square that we are going to need. Okay, I'm going to cut the first side. Glass cutter into the terps, glide it across the surface, then go back, apply pressure to score the glass, and use our happy snappers to remove the two pieces apart. Now we're going to mark our next side. Again, 5.5. Glass cutter into our terps. Use our happy snappers. There we go. Now we have our square. Now we're going to make the midpoint sections. Okay, now I'm going to mark the midpoints. Okay, midpoints have been marked. And now I'm going to go back in and draw that in by hand. Though they do say, if you can draw a perfect circle, one is slightly mad. So I think I'm on the safe side. Luckily we have the linear polisher to create it into a nice circle. Okay. There we go, we got our hand-drawn circle in, and we're going to remove the excess corners away. Right, go in with our happy snappers. All right, and the rest of it I'm going to polish by hand on the linear to get it into a perfectly, or as accurate, perfectly. I'm then going to polish this on the linear to get it into a more accurate circle. Hi everyone, welcome to the Cold Shop. The Cold Shop is the area where we do everything cold related with glass, so our polishing and our drilling. Okay, what's very important is that we have spectacles for any sharp glass obstacles or shards coming out at us. So it's very important to put that on. Okay, and what's also very important is our earplugs to protect our ears from the loud noises. This is our linear machine. And we have, this is our on button, the green one, and then the red one is our off button. At the back here is the lever for the water. What's important is we need to remember that when we polish with glass, that we need water, as the glass needs to be cooled down, otherwise it heats up and it has a very good chance of cracking. I'm going to demonstrate the polishing of this piece, and I'm going to create it into a round circle. All right, so first thing, earplugs in, and switching the machine on, and then when polishing, you always make sure that you are above the sanding belt, okay? And you never apply a lot of pressure because that would just break the belt. One actually just uses the momentum of the sand belt, and you're just holding the glass and moving it. And remember to keep moving the glass piece, otherwise you're going to sand that area flat. What you could see from the video, from what I did as well, you polish one side at an angle and you'll turn it around to another 45-degree angle and you'll polish the other side. And you'll keep continuing on the linishing machine until you get your desired shape that you want for your design. This is the drill press machine in the cold shop area. Right. We switch on again with the green button, and then we'll switch it off with the red button at the top. What is also important, again, to wear our clear spectacles for any objects for our eyes, and again, we need to wear earplugs for the noise. I have already marked out, it's always a good idea to mark out the positioning of where your holes will be before you start drilling. I have a 6mm Habit diamond drill bit in the machine, and what I'm first going to do is checking my lining up of the hole that I have, well, the marker I have made and the drill. So I'm happy with that. This is our water. Again, we need water because otherwise our glass will get hot and it will crack. So we need water to cool it down. So we're first going to open our water a little bit. Once we have our water on, we're going to switch our machine on at the green button, and the red button is for switching off. There we have our drill piece of glass. When drilling, always ensure that you're holding the glass down firmly and that you're doing it in slow motion. And this is also to ensure that you do not put too much pressure on the glass, otherwise there's a big chance of it cracking.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to do a general painting techniques for the designs that is required. The first thing I'm going to show you is a little sample piece of glass. We're going to do all the wet and dry applications on this piece of glass just to show you the general applications. First of all, PPE. It's very important to wear your gloves. We must wear gloves because the chemicals in the paint are quite poisonous. It contains lead, and if you're pregnant, I would suggest not to work with these paints at all. All right, now you must wear your mask so you can protect yourself from breathing in all these dangerous chemicals when you're doing a dry application or wet application. And it's also very important to work in a well-ventilated area. All right, so now we are going to use a dry application technique, and the tools that we'll need is a sieve. And the colors that we'll use is a yellow brown, and an orange. This is just to create a nice little sunset feel. When working with enamels, it's important to know which temperatures that you are working with. So at the moment I'm using high temp enamels, but the application is exactly the same for low temperature enamels. It's just when it comes to painting with these different temperatures, the texture of the paint differs. So for low temperatures, the paint texture is a lot harsher and a lot crispier. And for high temp enamels, the paint texture becomes a lot softer and a lot smoother. All right. Now for the dry application, we have our sieve and we have a spatula. We use a spatula just to pick up our enamel and to apply it into our sieve, and we're just gonna sieve it onto our glass. Alright, it's also important to work on a clean surface or on top of a piece of paper so you don't mess, and all that excess can just fall onto the paper. Alright, so we're just going to tap a certain area. And just repeat this process. Just to make sure you get an even coating. The tricky parts are on the edges, because we tend to think that they are all coated, but they're actually not. And we just repeat the same process with the other colors. Come in with our yellow-brown. And we apply under our orange. You can overlap the colors slightly, and that's just how we get that that blend of colors that the sunset has. Right, and then we work our way backwards. That is our sunset dry application. You can use the sieving technique in various ways. You can also create a stencil for yourself with different designs, different patterns. You place it on your glass and you just sieve on that stencil. They can just remove the stencil and you have a beautiful dry application of enamels. All right, now this is a sample piece of what we basically just did, and it is a 2-layer piece of glass, and the enamel is fused between those 2 sheets of glass. This sample is for Amo's jewelry piece. It has a sunset design, and that is basically what I just showed you. It's also very important to remember that high temp enamels can be fused between 2 sheets of glass, and it can be applied on the surface of the glass. However, low temp enamels can only be applied on the top layer of glass and not between, because that requires to go to a higher temperature. Okay, now that we've done our dry application, I'm going to show you how to do a wet application. The tools that we'll need is our spatula, so you make sure that's clean. Always have some paper, just to always keep your tools clean. Here are our brushes, our enamel paint, which is a high temperature of black, and our painting medium, and our water. And for certain techniques, it's always nice to have a little needle with a little bit of a spatula, small spatula. Right. Oh, and our sieve again. Okay, the first step is to sieve our enamel paint into our working palette, which is this block of glass over here. It's always nice or important to work in small samples of paint. Then you can always come back and add more. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, good.
So we are sieving our enamel through just to get rid of these little bumps or clumps. And just smooth that out. Then we just create a little hole in the middle. Then we take our painting medium. The painting medium helps the enamel to stick to the glass. If you just use water, the consistency of the paint tends to fade out. And we would like our colors to be solid. So if we use lots of water, you're going to have a very light, watered down texture on your glass. So I just scoop a little bit of medium into our little hole. Then we're just going to grind and smooth that out, mix it through. The consistency that we're looking for is, it's not too runny and it's not too thick. So it's almost like a gouache consistency if you've worked with gouache paint. And to compare it to something, it's almost like medicine, like cough syrup consistency. All right, this painting technique on how to do a wet application is exactly the same for all paints. So that's your high and low temps. All right, now I come in with a brush. Let's use, okay. Let's use this one and a nice big one. All right, I'm just going to wet our brush in some water. And I'm just going to lift our enamels from the palette. So we're just going to gather as much as I can onto the brush. And I'm going to now explain the different applications with the wet enamels. So the first one is a dabbing technique where you want a solid texture. So you're basically flooding the paint. And then our next application can be just a stroke. So you get a bit of a brush texture. You add more water into your brush. Paint will flow, will fade out a little bit at the end. Every time you move back into the paint gets lifted up back into the paintbrush. So it's always important to have one stroke of the application with your paintbrush, otherwise it lifts back if you paint back and forth. But that also depends on the texture and the technique that you are looking for. All right, and then we have another technique I can show you. We have a big brush. Let's give it some water. Just lift that all up. I'm just gonna go straight across, just so that you can see the texture of the paintbrush. When you lift the glass up, you can start to see the texture from the paintbrush. So you have the one application where you're dabbing and letting the paint flood. Then you have the other technique where you can just brush it through. All right, there's another technique that you can use when the paint is dry. You can take a needle and you can scratch back into your paint. You can't see it now, but when it is dry, it leaves the exposure of the glass, so you can create really fine detail into your paintings. Yeah. So you can also use a needle to redefine or define your edges a bit more and to add in a lot of detail. There's a lot of techniques that you can use, just like in normal painting on a canvas. You can apply the same techniques onto glass. So if you want to dab, you may dab. It will end up looking like that. It all depends on you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to discuss with you the application of applying plaster to your kiln shelves and your molds. And the reason we do this is that to make sure that the glass does not stick to the surface we are using in the kiln. I'm going to be showing the wet application, as in this way when we do a wet application you do not show any texture, it will create a smooth surface. One can also sieve the powdered plaster onto the surface, and this way you'll pick up more a textured surface if that is what you require. But for this technique we want a nice smooth surface for all our molds. What we are going to need is our half-mast respirator. because we don't want to breathe plaster in, as it's rather dangerous for our lungs, as it actually solidifies inside the lungs. We also need a goat hair soft brush, and this is what we're going to use to pick up the water plaster mixture that we're going to create or make, and that's what we're going to use to apply onto our surfaces. We also need a bucket with clean water inside. We do not need much, as well as my other bucket that has plaster. All right, please make sure that your kiln shelf has been cleaned before applying your new mold mix onto the surface, as any old plaster on the surface may create devitrification, which is that crystal milky layer that you find on top of glass, which is rather unappealing. Let me explain to you what I'm going to do first before putting my respirator on, otherwise my sound will be too muffled. So I have a basic water, clean water inside my bucket, and I'm going to sieve a little bit of my plaster into the water. It is important to remember we're not making a mold, so we don't need to apply a lot of plaster. It's a watered down mixture of plaster and water. Okay, I can take my respirator off because all the dust is gone, and I'm going to pick up my brush and I'm going to mix that water and the plaster into each other. As you can see, it's a very watered down water and plaster mixture. All right, so this brush allows us to pick a lot of the water up at a time, to be able to make one brush stroke. Do not go back on itself, as it will lift with the previous plaster that you have just applied. When you put your brush back down in your bucket, remember to go all the way to the bottom, because your plaster will tend to settle at the bottom of this mixture. So you can see I'm applying one direction first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply in the opposite direction afterwards, and the reason for doing this is to create less brush marks on the surface, because glass is able to pick up the texture that one puts on the surface. I normally do this 3 times. And it's a good idea to do this the day before, because you want the kiln shelf to be completely dry before putting your glass on top of this kiln shelf. If there's still moisture on your kiln shelf, it will create steam, and that will also can cause devitrification or bubbles on the surface of your glass. As you can see, I'm going back to put my 3rd layer in, and this will be my last layer for this kiln shelf. When this plaster and water has dried on the kiln shelf, it actually creates a white powdery coat on the surface. All right, I still have enough water in my mix, so I'm going to use that now quickly to also apply it to my molds. There we go. And now what I'm going to do, whilst these are drying, I'm going to ensure that I throw this down, not a drain, into a dustbin, because remember, plaster does block your drain, and wash your brush immediately, because if your plaster dries on your brush, you won't be able to use this again. Also ensure that your plaster has been sealed, that no water can come into this because any moisture in the atmosphere will contaminate your plaster that you also cannot use it. Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you now the importance of prepping your kiln. One needs to ensure that the kiln is completely clean by vacuuming the inside as well as going lightly over the elements to ensure that no dust or leftover plaster is sitting on the kiln elements or on the kiln bricks, as this dust can create devitrification again in our glass. So with glass, it's always important to make sure that the area is completely clean before putting our kiln shelf in and our glass in and switching the kiln program on. Oh, also another thing is to make sure that your glass is clean. Before placing it in the kiln, make sure you've washed it and you've dried it and that it's spotless and no dust is on it. I'm now going to vacuum just to show you. All right, now our kiln has been vacuumed and ready for firing. This is our controller, and on our controller we put in our program, and you'll see we work with a little ramp system. All right, so I'm going to first take you through the process and explain to you when the certain lights come up. So you'll see the first one at the moment is highlighted, is your first dot. In that dot, you'll see with these two little symbols here, you'll see a temperature and a clock. At the moment, just the clock is highlighted or displaying with a red dot. This means we are talking about time only. So for instance, if we want to delay our kiln firing, what we would do is, say for instance, we wanted to only fire first thing when we come in the morning, we could have put a delay in there for 12 hours so that when we come in the morning, it has started its firing process. Okay, we don't always use this, it's just there if you need it. Then we go again with our arrows and we go into our next program or next section within our program. Now you'll see the next dot is highlighted and you'll see that the time and temperature at the moment as well is shining with the red dots. This is now saying that we are talking about time and temperature. So how many degrees Celsius you want your program to go up according to your time. So if you wanted to go up 250 degrees an hour to 500, as an example, it will take 2 hours. Okay, then you go up to your next temperature. And you'll see we are just talking about temperature. So here, that was our time to get to our top temperature. So at the moment, you'll see the program is 680, but I'll take you through that step just now. So that is at the moment our temperature. Then we have our next dot that parallel is our, again, time only. So that is talking about a soaking point. So we can allow our glass to stay at a certain temperature. Next process, now we're ramping up again, if you can see by what the picture is showing here. So now again we are working with time and temperature. So the time we want it to take up with the temperature till we get to our top temperature. Okay, then we have again a delay. So it's the same process repeated. When we are on this process here, often one is able to open up the kiln. Anything above I would say 680 is fine to open up your kiln to see what's happening, but never allow your kiln to drop lower than 680. This going down is our crash cooling. So this will be able to help us to freeze our glass in that process that we have just seen in the kiln. And then it will go down to a temperature we normally want to hold our glass. And then from this process, we talk about annealing. So we want our glass to go down slowly, therefore that it doesn't crack. Again, we can have a delay of temperature, and then we can go down with our annealing slowly as possible, depending obviously on the thickness of the glass, until normally room temperature or 30 degrees, where we are able to open up the kiln. All right, so this is our high temp enamel firing. We do not need a delay, so we're going to start immediately, and we are going to go up 200 degrees an hour. So I'm pushing my up and down arrow at the top, which allows me to adjust my display at the top. Okay, then I'm going to go up to the top temperature I want for my middle section of my program, and I want that to be 580. Okay, our next section where we're going to allow our glass to soak is at 580. Anything between 60 and 580, our glass is under stress. So it's a point where we want our glass to go up slowly or go down slowly. So always keep that in mind. So now we're at our midpoint of 580, and I'm going to now put a soaking point of 10 minutes in. Our glass is not that thick, so we don't need it to allow it to soak for that long. So that why we put a soak in is that to make sure that our glass, the entire, not just the top surface, but the entire, from the bottom to the top, has evenly heated up in between. Then we're going to actually go up full. Our glass has no tension in it. Because our glass has no tension in it, we don't have to worry about taking it up slowly from 580. Remember, above 580, we can work at a much faster ramp if there's no tension. So what full stands for, basically, it's basically telling me that I want my glass to ramp up as fast as possible, or sometimes it may mean as fast down as possible to cool to a certain point. So I want my glass to go as fast as possible up to my top temperature, where I'm working with 815, which is according to my test pieces, my desired top temperature for my high temp enamel paints. I'm then going to allow it to soak for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is sufficient for this firing, and then I need to now crash cool. So now I'm not physically going to crash cool, which one can also do. You can assist the kiln by opening up the lid and crash cooling the kiln down to 680 if you're going to manually do it. If you're allowing your kiln to do it, you need to bring it down full. So again, now I'm making my kiln go as fast as possible down, and I'm going to rather anneal it a bit lower to 580, because this is now where my glass starts becoming under tension again. And then I'm going to hold there for about 15 minutes. And why only 15 minutes is because my glass is not that thick. If my glass was thicker, then I would hold it for longer, because it is important that the glass is evenly heated before annealing it down. You don't want the middle part of the glass, which normally takes longer to get to the desired temperature you have. So it's important to anneal and hold it there before bringing it down. Now I'm going to bring my glass down. Remember again, the thicker the glass is, the slower this process will be. I'm only going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour to 30 degrees. And in this process, it will slowly cool down and my glass won't then be under tension anymore. You're allowed to open the kiln, obviously depending on your outer environment. But in summer in South Africa, you may open it up already at 60 degrees. Obviously in winter, it will be a much lower temperature, but I always just put in 30 degrees just to be safe. Hi everyone, we now have our high temp enamel paint in the kiln, which we're going to fire to 815 degrees Celsius. They're both Amel's works. The one is her sun design for the homeware, and the other one is her jewelry piece. The jewelry piece, we are first going to fire the high temp enamel paint onto the glass to make sure that when we put the copper wire in between, that it does not move the paint at all. And the high temp for the sunrise for AMO, we need to make sure that the paint is well secured properly onto the glass before placing and fusing all the pieces together. My program is in the controller already. I'm going to put my program on and I'm going to close it with just a little bit opening until we get to 100 degrees Celsius. This is to ensure that if any moisture is in our kiln, that it can escape. I'm now going to discuss the low temp enamel firing. This temperature ranges between about 540 to 580. So just keep in mind to always do test pieces beforehand to make sure you found your desired firing top temperature point before starting your final piece. My top temperature with this will go up to 580. First, our delay. We do not need a delay, so we're going to pass that section. And we're going to take our glass up 200 degrees an hour, up to 300. And why 300 is because I'm actually going to pass the section. I'll explain that now. So once I get to 300, I'm actually going to put in no delay here. So it's actually going to go through 300, past that, and it's going to go up exactly the same temperature again. Let me just double check. Yes, I'm going to bring it up then 250 degrees, so slightly faster, up to my top temperature, which is going to be 580. Okay, so I didn't take my time at 300 because I don't need a delay there. Our glass is at quite a critical point. It's got a lot of tension there, so we're rather going to pass through and we're going to keep ramping up but at a slightly faster degree temperature up to 580. And then we're going to hold it there for 15 minutes to ensure that our glass powder enamel paint has made proper contact with our glass surface and has they don't fuse together because it's not high enough temperature, but has melted on top of the glass and has made permanent contact. We are then going to, now we're not going to crash cool with this process, reason being because we're already at 580. So what we're going to do is we're going to say full, but we're going to cheat the system by confusing it and saying we're going back to 580. So we initially actually just staying exactly the same temperature where we were. And because of that, we there don't need to hold our process there because we're already at 580 and we held it at the top for 15 degrees. So what we're basically already doing here, we are starting the annealing process, 15 minutes at the top temperature. And therefore we are going to slowly process, we are actually annealing already from the top because we have skipped that middle section there. And then we are going to put in our annealing, which I like to work with is normally 100 degrees an hour until 30 degrees, and we're allowed to open at room temperature depending on our outer environment. Okay, so we have our low temp enamel projects in the kiln. We have Lebor's coaster and we have AMO's jewelry piece in, and now and the kiln program is in for a high temperature of 580. And I'm going to close the kiln lid. We're going to leave the kiln open just slightly for 100 degree, until 100 degrees, and I'm going to push start. So when the kiln reaches 100, I will then close the lid fully. The reason for this is that if there is any moisture inside the kiln, that is able to escape.
Hello everyone, today we're going to be making a jewelry piece. In this design, This is Amo's jewelry piece design, and we will be making a donut bead, a bead, a bicone bead, and a pendant to carry the weight at the bottom. The tools that we will be using is a graphite paddle, a parallel press, and tweezers. And to start our flame, we open the gas anti-clockwise by igniting that with matches, and then we slowly turn our oxygen nozzle anti-clockwise as well to release a blue flame. So when we start our flame, we open our gas just a little bit, and then we ignite our flame by lighting a match, and we start a little flame. Kill that. We open our gas to lengthen our flame. Then we open our oxygen. Our nozzle is over here, until we hear a little slight roaring sound. The flame should be blue, and the length should be about 15 centimeters. So we just adjust the gas. We open that just to make the flame longer, and we open the oxygen just to make the flame hotter. The safety procedure is always to wear your glasses. Okay. Now before we start beading, we need to coat our mandrel. This steel rod is a mandrel, and we need to coat it with bead release so that the glass does not stick onto the steel rod. So we do that by dipping the mandrel into the bead release. We tap off the excess just on the tip. Then we just tap it on the table so you can get an even coating all around. We place it on our little block. Okay, now I'm going to open the flame one more time to open my gas, which is the red nozzle. Just that orange flame. I open my oxygen. I just adjust the length with the gas and the heat with the oxygen. All right. Now the next step is to prepare all your decoration tools that is needed for the beading for your donuts. So on the design, it requires a stringer that is a slight black line around one donut, or around 4 donuts. We are now going to pull our stringer, which is a black stringer, which will be the decoration part on our donut beads. Okay. The tools that we'll need is our tweezers. So we have that in hand, and our black glass rod. All right, just clear my space. When we are heating up, or when we are in the process of melting our glass rod, we start melting our glass rod at the top of the flame where it is warm, and we slowly introduce the glass rod into the flame so that it doesn't crack and explode in our faces. So we start at the top, and we are turning continuously to get an even consistent heat around the glass rod. and then we slowly bring it in. Once you see the tip of the glass rod starting to glow, you'll see it a lot clearly with the glasses. The tip turns orange. Then you can slowly bring it into the flame. It's important to remember that the bluer the flame, the hotter the flame is. So you don't want to come straight into the flame. You'll burn your color. It turns this metallic green color on your glass, and we don't want that. So we keep it at in a medium position of the flame. Right, now we're slowly turning, and we are going to gather a blob of glass on the glass rod. And as the glass melts, you just turn your glass rod at like a 45-degree angle so it can fall onto itself. The slower you turn your glass rod in the flame, the faster it melts. All right, once you have a bit of a blob there, it's about 1 centimeter thick or wide. It's about the size as a M&M or Smartie. Now we have our tweezers in our hand ready. And the technique used is a pinch and a pull. And you're also just trying to keep the glass rod level at the same time. So let me do that again. Going to pinch. That's the technique. I'm going to pinch and then let's pull. But as you're pulling, you must watch as the glass cool down. If the glass is too hot and you pull too fast, your stringer will be too thin. So you need to find that control in your pulling technique. So I'm just melting this again. Pinch, and I pull, and I wait. And I pull, then I wait. And I pull, and I pull, and pull, 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 pull. Till I can't pull anymore. And I come close into the flame to cut. That's the only time I come close into the flame with the glass rod, is to just cut away. All right. That is our first stringer. I'll just make another one as a backup. All right, now we're just gonna fix this end of the rod, just melt it down a bit. We have a graphite board for a reason, so we can just reshape our glass rod, the tip of it, so it's nice and flat. All right, put that back. Now I start with the first donut bead, and with that we are required to use a mandrel. The first color that I am using is yellow, so that is this color over here. We take our first mandrel, make sure it is evenly coated. We hold our mandrel in our left hand, and we are continuously turning because it needs to heat up in the flame, and it's the same process on our right hand where the glass rod will be held. I will hold the glass rod. All right, and I hold them both parallel to each other, up starting from the top of our flame. You don't want to come straight into the flame with a glass rod, otherwise it will crack and explode. And we always keep turning our glass rod so we can get an even consistency of heat through our glass. Each color changes differently under heat, but there's no need to worry, it will come back once it's cooled down. Okay, so now our glass rod is going to come into the flame, because now we're starting to see that glow, and our mandrel stays just at the tip of our flame so that I can get a nice heat. The mandrel needs to be hot enough for the glass to stick. If it's not hot enough and we apply our glass on top, the glass will just slide off. But just also remember not to burn our bead release, otherwise our glass won't come off our glass rod. So we'll know that when the bead release starts turning white. At the moment, it is still fine. Okay. Kind of have to multitask here. So as you're turning your mandrel to get it heated evenly, you also have to turn your glass rod and gather a nice blob of glass. And keeping the glass rod in the middle of the flame. If you come too close, it will burn the color. And also be working with gravity, so when you see the glass melting down, we just turn the glass rod up again. So that's the size that we are looking for. So that means for the rest of our donuts, they must all be this size. You can compare it to a Smartie. I think Smarties are a lot bigger than, not a Smartie, a Jelly Tot. Yeah, Jelly Tots are bigger than Smarties. So now that we've got a nice gather of glass, I'm going to just bring our glass out and let it droop to a teardrop. We bring it into a flame, and I'm going to start applying our glass. We are perpendicular to our mandrel, and the process is by having the glass hot, which I'll do now, and you're going to turn the mandrel, and your glass rod is just above the mandrel, but you're holding your glass rod still. But you're turning the mandrel, and as you turn, the mandrel picks up the glass, and it will center itself into a donut. Okay, now let's just heat that up again. It is nice and hot. I'm in the flame. I'm also turning my glass rod around. Come with my mandrel. I start turning my mandrel. It picks up the glass. Cut away. Now just come into the flame a little bit, just the center. And when I move slowly, the glass moves with gravity to center around the mandrel. Once our donut is centered, we come out of the flame and we let it cool for a bit. Now we take our black stringer that we prepared earlier on. We cannot make a stringer while we're making a donut. Otherwise, our donut will crack in that process and break, and will be too cold to apply our stringer. So we always prepare our stringers beforehand. So we keep our donut above the flame to keep it warm. Our glass needs to be warm, otherwise our stringer won't attach. We bring our flame down to size. So we do that by reducing the gas and the oxygen. So we have a thinner flame and a cooler flame. But we keep our bead at the top of the flame so it stays warm. Now we come with our stringer. We come to the back of our flame at the top of the flame. And our mandrel slowly moves above the flame, but slightly in the middle. And we're going to slowly heat up our stringer. You can start seeing a glow. And as you start seeing the glow, you need to quickly pick that up and roll into the stringer. And I'll do that now. So we see it glowing. Catch that and we roll into it. Then we turn it around. And we come to the top of our flame. And we just melt and turn the mandrel into the stringer as I'm holding it, until it makes a full circle. All right, once it's reached that end, I just close that part. I can use my tweezers or a graphite paddle just to flatten that little knob there. All right, now I open my flame a bit by opening my gas and adjusting my oxygen. Now I'm going to melt that down. I'm just going to move this to the edge. There we go. If you don't melt the stringer down after applying it, the stringer will break off. So it needs to fuse into the background color. You can always leave a bit of a texture ring around the donut, or you can melt it all the way down. And it's just about recentering again because we add a bit more glass. Once it's centered, bring it out of the flame, and we anneal our bead. Annealing is just a process of cooling down our glass at a controlled temperature. We keep it at the top of our flame for about 30 seconds or so. We need to cool down our bead before we put it into the vermiculite in the pot. Otherwise, if we don't let it cool down, our bead will deform and lose its shape. So a good indication is when we see the color coming back. Right, and that is our donut bead. And that goes into the vermiculite for further annealing. All right, now that we've made our donut bead, it's the same process. According to the design, we need 4 donut beads. And in the middle of those 4 donut beads, we need a bicone. This bicone bead is just a solid orange, dark orange, red color. So that's what we'll be making. So that's the color that we'll use. And we'll need a graphite paddle to shape our bead. Our flame is already on, so I just need to adjust the size by opening our gas and opening our oxygen. taking a mandrel coated with bead release. Just adjusting the size. A bigger bead always require a bigger flame. So we just adjust it like that. All right, now I come in with my glass rod, always starting at the top of the flame where it is warm. It's still warm up here. So if you want to, you can always start here. But we'll start over here. It's good enough. All right, a bicone bead requires 3 donuts fused together. And then we melt it down and then we shape it into a bicone, which is almost like a diamond shape. As previously explained in our donut process, holding the mandrel at the top so we don't burn our bead release, and our glass rod is the one that comes into the flame as it heats up slowly. All right. We gathered enough glass. It's about a Smartie size. And now we're going to apply a donut onto the mandrel. So we have our little blob of glass. Take it out of the flame. Let it droop. I do this for control. Then I come into the flame again. Let it heat at the tip. Come with our mandrel and catch it as we turn the mandrel. Cut away. We just let that center go to the top so it can cool down. And as that cools down at the top of our flame, we come and do our second donut. Apply right next to our first donut. Just let that center for a bit. And bring it out again. And now we do our third donut. Apply right next to a second donut. Cut away and let that center. I'm going to add just a ring of glass in the middle of our second donut, our middle donut. I'm going to fuse all of this together. Bigger bead, bigger flame. So we just adjust our gas a little bit. We can swap hands. We're moving slowly because that melts our glass a lot faster. And we keep turning to keep it centered on our mandrel. You can slowly start to see our 3 donuts becoming one big donut. One big, I don't know, barrel. All right. Switch hands for a second. I come to the top of our flame. Okay, no, sorry. I'm still in this hand. Still in this hand. I'm heating the glass up. Now I'm using my left hand to hold the graphite paddle. I'm having it close by because now I'm going to start shaping. When I start shaping my bicone, I turn my mandrel at an angle into the flame. So I'm heating one side of the bead. Once I'm starting to see it melt, will be molten, I now start shaping. I do that by having a graphite pedal and I'm turning it at an angle just against the edge. Let me do that again. It's at an edge of the graphite paddle and I'm just turning it or pivoting it on the spot. I do the other side, come at an angle like that. I've started to see it glow into that molten consistency. I can now come to the other side, but I'm holding my graphite paddle at an angle this time for the other side of the bead. And the technique that I'm using is holding it at the edge and I'm turning it on its spot. I use a bit of pressure just to shape that bead. So again, for the one side, the graphite paddle is at the angle. I come at the edge of the graphite paddle balancing the mandrel on the edge of the paddle, and then I'm turning the glass onto the graphite paddle with pressure. Then I just go back and forth on each side until the shape starts to form. Right, I just flash the bead in the flame a little bit so I can heat up on either sides, on both sides, consistently. Then I bring it out. And that is our bicone bead. Let it cool down. Before we put it into the vermiculite. If it's still too hot, the bead will deform. So I cool it down just above the flame. And then we place it into our vermiculite for further cooling. Okay, now our next step is to make the pendant, which is the weight bead at the bottom of our jewelry piece. It's to hold everything together. So the process of making this is by using all the colors that is in front of me here. And the technique we'll be using, or the tools we will be using, is a parallel press to flatten our bead. And we will use a mandrel, of course. And the steps that we will be using is make a donut, which will be our base color. And then we're going to use from each of these colors, we're going to apply a little blot on the donut. And then we'll melt it down, and then we will squeeze everything together into our pendant bead. Okay, so we have our flame. Just adjust the size. Open oxygen. Okay, just there. All right. Okay, we're coming with our mandrel and our base color, which is black. Start at the top of our flame. Okay, our base color is quite, it will be slightly bigger than our usual donut, because our pendant is quite large. So we are required to make a big blob. So we're going to melt that down. Just adjusting the... that's quite a big blob. Just controlling it onto the glass, onto the glass rod, and let it droop. Let it droop. I come into my flame. I'm going to start applying my donut. Let it heat up a bit. Just letting it droop. I catch the glass as the mandrel's turning. As the mandrel's turning, it catches the glass and it centers. Just melt that down a bit. All right, now I'm going to start applying blobs of glass all around our little donut. Then I'm going to melt that down, and then I'm going to squish it all together into a pendant. Okay, now we're going to come in with our little red or dark orange. I heat it, the tip, the top of our flame. We're not heating up a lot, it's just the tip of the glass. So almost like an Astro size, if you know your chocolates. Okay, it's about that much, that's all you need. Then you're just gonna poke it onto our donut. So come into our flame, poke and up. Just randomly. Okay, just flatten that down. We come with our next color. Start at the top of our flame again. You don't want your glass to be too high above the flame, otherwise it cools down. And if it cools down too much, it can cause this crack. So we're just going to hold it at the bottom underneath our flame so it can stay warm. But we are still going to introduce our new glass rod at the top of our flame. Just the tip, that's all we need. Right, we just randomly blotch. So it's a little press, a touch, then pull in the flame to cut. Right, I think that's enough. We'll come with our next color. just the tip, and repeat the same thing. It's just random blots all over our bead. Alright, flatten that, come with our next color. I'm quickly just melting those blots down because they can chip off if they are too cold. Okay, I'm not melting them down all the way. Right, same thing again, just a random. Okay, I'm coming in with our last two colors. It's starting to look like a virus. Okay. Slowly starting to fill in those gaps. All right. Now we use our last color. And our last color will just fill up the rest of the gaps that are left. Now we're going to just melt everything down. My hand is getting really sore, so I'm just going to switch hands for this process. Now at this process, once all those little dots have been fused and melted together, we're going to slowly let the bead, while it's still very hot, drop using gravity. So that means we're going to stop turning at a point and let the bead just fall. Getting some breeze there. I'm gonna open my bead just a little, my flame just a little bit. So making my bead super hot, but without burning it. Okay, once it turns almost like that yellow-orange glow, you know it's super hot, then we just stop. And we can see how the bead slowly falls. Just a little bit. We come out so it can cool down and stop falling. And then the next process is to just press the entire bead. So we're going to switch hands, melt the whole thing, and have your parallel press ready at hand. So this shape of the bead is quite funny, so we have to turn it, make sure it is heated consistently. Once it is hot enough, once it is orange, that's how you know it's hot enough, and it's ready to squeeze. So we come with a parallel press, and we just insert and press our bead. As you press your bead against something cold, which is the metal, the bead cools down, so you have to bring it back into the flame so it can cool down properly. And when you press your bead against a parallel press, it leaves these little ring marks. So always come into the flame and just melt that away slightly. All right, we do that again. Now, according to our design, just need to shape it into a more rounder shape. You can see it folds over. So we have our graphite paddle at hand. Just melt those edges. We just press that down. Could even just flatten that side. Do the other side. It's always important to refer back to your design so you can keep the shapes the same. I'm going to melt the bottom part. Again, because our shape is a bit wider. We just melt away those ring marks. You can also just flatten those edges a bit. There we have it. We have our very abstract pendant. All those colors have been fused and mixed together. Before we finish, we refer back to the design, and I see that we have a black circle center. So that means we have to apply a little blob of black in the middle of our pendant. So we keep turning our pendant, making sure that's warm. Right, we just heat a little bit and we just put a blob in the middle. Then we do the other side. If you feel like you added too much, just heat the tip of that black. Take your tweezers and just slowly pull away. Right. We melt that down. With our parallel press, just press that slightly. Just melt those ring marks away. Just use a paddle just to even out that bead, because sometimes it can deform as you melt again. Alright, and that is our pendant. So we let it cool down at the top of our flame.